Ok, bentrovati a questo nuovo appuntamento di Appunti di Geopolitica. Abbiamo saltato una settimana, come avevamo detto, per un po' di problemi logistici, ma adesso siamo qua e per farci perdonare con una puntata un po' diversa dal solito, nel senso che oltre a Manlio Graziano e Giulia Shaughnessy che già ci accompagnano quasi sempre, Manlio sempre, Giulia quasi sempre in queste puntate, abbiamo il piacere di avere con noi Mariam Qureshi dal Pakistan, che è un analista del centro Speakman che chi segue appunti di geopolitica ha imparato a conoscere e starà con noi nella prima parte e questa parte della discussione la faremo in inglese perché appunto Mariam scrive e parla in inglese anche se voi la leggete in italiano. Quindi do il benvenuto agli altri ospiti di questa puntata. E adesso passiamo in inglese per parlare con Mariam Qureshi, partendo dall'India, di quello che sta succedendo in quel pezzo di mondo, che sono tante cose. Trovate un suo pezzo su Appunti, che si chiama India, Emirati Arabi Uniti e Unione Europea, i nuovi imperativi geopolitici. Ok, Mariam, thank you so much for being with us. It's a real pleasure to have you virtually in person. I mean, but we can see and not only read you. So thank you so much for your time because it's pretty late in Pakistan. So we are truly grateful that you are with us. Okay, so let's start with a very broad question. So you wrote in your piece that India is very active in this moment on multiple fronts, and that India has signed two important deals, one with the United Emirates and one with the European Union. The deal with the Emirates is focused on energy and LNG, natural gas, and also on defense and other topics. And the deal with the EU is focused on trade. We have already discussed this with Mali. So, what is the logic behind this two negotiations, these two alliances, and how do you assess the strategy for India to navigate this complex moment where the relationship with the US is not as how to say stable and reliable as before?
Thank you so much for having me. Okay, so a bit of a broader historical context before we zoom into these details. So India has historically been part, ever since its independence in 1947, historically been part of the non-aligned movement, ostensibly to have a greater autonomy on its foreign policy. Although it did develop closer ties with Russia in the process, which was particularly solidified in the 1971 Treaty of Friendship. And that since then, up until very recently, Russia has been the main supplier of defense and technologies for India. And over these decades, its relationship with the United States has been lukewarm, you could say. They did try to sign a couple of deals and memorandum of understandings in expanding defense ties, particularly during the Biden administration. And that's one aspect. The other aspect is that India sees itself with the ambition of becoming a regional superpower, basically a regional power, and it's in a regional strategic rivalry with China. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is, of course, the infamous rivalry over territories, terrorism, and whatnot with Pakistan, which was very recently rekindled in the 2025 conflict between the two nuclear arms,
One
might I
of the
add.
one of the many wars that Donald Trump pretends to have settled. Maybe,
Yeah.
is it correct? Donald Trump brought peace again in the region with after that war or not?
Yeah, I mean, given that we are still, on the brink of fighting again on the Indus Water Treaty issue and other issues, I doubt that peace is there. But indeed, and that's one of the, very big bone of contention between India and the United States, because India categorically refuses to believe. And the main reason for that is because India wants the Kashmir issue to be resolved bilaterally with Pakistan and not on international forums. So recognizing a third-party intervention, makes the case weaker for this, because Pakistan wants this to be settled in the United Nations and with third-party interventions. So again, there's a greater history to that. But so coming back to why they are signing these deals and what is happening, obviously India is in a very precarious situation. It has rekindled its feud with Pakistan, and that's still ongoing. I mean, we're not actively fighting, of course, but the tensions are very high. The water treaty remains suspended. There are accusations across the border. Then, of course, China is encircling India and increasing its leverage over the small states in the region. And India is effectively becoming isolated. One very big example is the recent Bangladesh National Party coming into power that has historically been anti-India, as opposed to Hasina Wajid that enjoyed very close ties with India, which is quite apparent given that she is in India right now.
Sorry to interrupt you. Just to be sure that we are on the same page. Bangladesh has just voted in the last week after
Yeah.
more than a year, I think, with a transitional government led by Nobel Prize Mohammed Yunus, and it was, I mean, the very first election after the end of, I mean, we can call a regime by Sheikh Hasina. I mean, a kind of authoritarian regime that ruled Bangladesh for a while with repression and so on. So it's a big moment for Bangladesh. But you're saying, Mariam, if I understood correctly, that the power, the party now in power is has an anti-India stance, correct? So it's bad news
Yes,
for India. Okay.
exactly. Yeah. So obviously, these things are going through Modi's mind. And then Trump comes in with a bombardment of tariffs. Firstly, the regular tariffs that Trump was imposing left, right, and center on every state. And then a special additional tariff for purchasing Russian oil. And that's, and yes, the purchase from Russia did increase after the Ukraine war. But when Trump imposed these tariffs, it was quite a crunch for the Indian economy. And of course, India was struggling as it is with its dependency on Russian defense and arms. Because after the Ukraine war, there were supply chain issues. Russia was lagging in its commitments, and naturally, the performance also raised qualms about the extent to which these arms and ammunitions would actually be helpful for India. And so it started to diversify. It reached out to France. It reached out to the United States. It reached out to Italy. And at the same time, obviously, it was trying to diversify its economy as well, to make sure that it's not dependent on any one state, which is basically what its multi-alignment foreign policy is all about, that you do not restrict yourself to one partner or one ally, but rather you are friends with everyone. But obviously, the tariffs had a huge impact, and that forced India to seek new ties and develop new trade deals. That's when the United Arab Emirates and the European Union come in. Prior to these two, India did seek deals and pledges for investment from Japan, Australia, and it also signed a free trade agreement with the United Kingdom. And then it was trying to sign one with the European Union, but the European Union was stalling that, and it has been stalling. The discussion was on again, off again, going on for decades. But what eventually pushed the European Union to sign this mother of all trade deals was the unreliability and inconsistency coming in from the United States. So it was kind of a very opportunistic time where they wanted to diversify as well, and they wanted to signal to the United States that, okay, we are also looking for other partners. To what extent is this deal truly the mother of all deals? I don't really think so. It remains to be seen, because there are still so many aspects that are to be negotiated. And then more importantly, India's domestic policies are inherently protectionistic, and there is a lot of bureaucratic red tape. There is a lot of, especially from the small to medium-sized businesses, resistance to foreign investments. So to what extent is this actually going to benefit? We'll see. But as long as, as far as the signals are concerned, they both succeeded in signaling to the United States that, yes, we have other partners.
Okay, that's super clear. Maybe you can help us to understand, because I mean, the intersection between Asian politics and Middle Eastern politics are always super complex. So maybe you can clarify us how the deal with the United Emirates is connected with other conflicts and other moving parts in the Middle East, especially since also Pakistan is active in fostering alliances. So
Yeah.
maybe you can focus on that, and then I give the floor to Manlio and to Julia to ask you other questions. I don't want to abuse of my powers.
Okay, so to better understand why specifically the United Arab Emirates was chosen, we need to look at two important contexts before this. So first, that Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates are strategic rivals in the region. Traditionally, Saudi Arabia has held power, has assumed to hold the regional role, and now the UAE is seen as a kind of a revisionist power. It's interfering in the conflicts in weaker states. So, with the conflict in Yemen, in Libya, in Sudan, it's supporting. It's kind of like a proxy war going on, where Saudi Arabia is supporting one side, UAE is supporting another side, and at the first, before India, Pakistan was the one to exploit this. So Pakistan has traditionally had very close ties with the Saudi Arabia, and very deep economic ties. And they turned that into and they kind of, evolved those ties into the defense area as well, by signing the Defense Pact. The very crucial part of this pact was that it had a very NATO's Article 5-like clause, where Pakistan would come to Saudi Arabia's aid. And they very specifically blurred out whether this meant that Pakistan would provide nuclear umbrella to Saudi Arabia or not. So at the moment, consciously, you can even imagine that maybe the nuclear umbrella will be extended. So obviously that kind of, creates a bit of tension.
Okay.
So and it's not that India does not have good ties with Saudi Arabia. It does. Saudi Arabia is a very major trading partner with the United States. But of course, this kind of an alignment pushed the Indians to form ties with, obviously, the strategic rival UAE. The first trade deal that was signed and that was official was obviously on oil, and that was seen as Modi succumbing to the American pressure to limit its dependency on Russian oil and find alternative partners. But there is also talks about a potential defense deal with the UAE. And that's going to be a bit more, interesting and challenging as well, because that's going to put two strategic rivals of South Asia and two strategic rivals of Middle East, in two blocks. And that can effectively mean that the lines that were once quite very firm between what's a South Asian conflict and what's a Middle Eastern conflict will soon become blurred. And just to add to that, after this deal, we had a US and Indian deal where the tariffs were lowered. It's not exactly a win for Modi because domestically, Modi is receiving a lot of criticism that its multi-alignment policy has failed, that it has succumbed to the American pressure. So, and now that it has, as we know that Modi today is in France signing a defense deal. I mean, okay, but in the 2025 conflict with Pakistan, the Rafale jets were downed by the Chinese planes that the Pakistanis had. So that's also an interesting thing to keep in mind, but obviously just kind of
So the
shows.
Rafale jets are made in France, correct? So I mean,
Yes.
that's why you were mentioning them. No, that's
Yeah.
super interesting. So, Julia, I don't know if you have questions to Mariam, and then we go to Manlio.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's all really interesting. I think my question, well, yeah, living in Brussels is a bit more focused on the EU-India trade deal. And I was wondering whether you think, I mean, obviously it's a bit of a reaction to what's happening, particularly in the US, but I'm wondering how it fits into the historical legacy of relations between the EU and India. So, is this something that's just a reaction to other geopolitical factors happening in the world currently? Or is it something that you can see having sort of like setting a foundation for a change in the relationship between India and the EU going forward?
So obviously the immediate geopolitical considerations, I think, are a big factor in moving these two close together, because historically, while EU looks at India as a very, important player in the Indo-Pacific, particularly if it wants to rival China in the region, it has been very of India's close ties with Russia and its dependency on Russia. So much so that in the NATO exercises that happened last year, India participated, which were obviously a very big security concern for the European Union. And also to keep in mind that this deal was, it looked impossible for nearly 2 decades. They were going on and on about, trying to sign it. But the circumstances today moved both to overlook this very important consideration that India has ties with Russia. And it still sees Russia as a very important, player in its foreign policy. So to the extent that this can evolve more in the future, it remains to be seen. Obviously, it is going to be fraught with a lot of challenges.
Thanks.
Okay. Manlio, do you want to add something? I mean, my question for you is always the same. I mean, since you're trying to find a rationale in the apparently crazy US strategy, what do you think that people in Washington think, looking at what Mariam was describing? I mean, is it in the US interest to have this realignment in Southeast Asia and in the Middle East? Is something that the US, I mean, advocates for, or is it something that is, I mean, one of the many collateral damages of Trump's strategy? So, what do you think?
I think, first of all, that Trump and strategy are two words that you cannot put together. This is the first thing I would say. Second, I think that this is a huge American mess, in the sense that when you say what is the reaction in Washington, it depends on who you are talking of, because even within the administration of the United States, there are people who have very different ideas. What I know is the fact that when Donald Trump decided to put this 25% more taxes on India, there was a reaction of the, let's say, more traditional establishment of the United States, because they started working in mending the relations with India under the George Walker Bush administration in 2008. There was the first trip of Bush in Delhi, and it was really a turning point, because for the first time, I mean, as Mariam said, India had these historical links with Russia, and that was the first time that the United States entered in these relations and tried to disrupt it. Of course, the idea was to use India not against China, but at least to help contain China. So there was an idea behind it. Today, I don't think that there are ideas, or rather, there are too many ideas. And so it's very difficult to understand. By the way, this extension of Middle East into South Asia, or South Asia into Middle East, is another outcome of this U.S. confusion, because mess, I would say, rather, because when they decided to attack Iran was weakened by the war in Gaza, of course, very, very much so. It was weakened by itself because of its policies, because of the sanctions, and so on and so forth. But the final strike was the attack from the United States, when, by the way, when they were discussing, they had a meeting about a possible negotiation about the nuclear, Iranian nuclear. This final attack was, as I said, the final straw that weakened Iran. And what I see, in my opinion, this new rivalry, which is not very new, but it emerged in a very clear way between the Emirates and Saudi Arabia, was also provoked by the void left by Iran. Iran played a huge role in the region. Of course, Iran is the most, in historical terms, the most important actor in the region. And the fact that Iran is so weakened means that everybody else tried to take advantage, because as usual, wherever there is a void, there are a lot of different actors who try to fill the void. And so I think that if there is someone who thinks in rational terms in DC, they should be very worried by this new link between South Asia and the Middle East, because of course the two stages can communicate and exchange their crisis. And since we know very well that if there is, I don't remember who probably was Brzezinski who was talking about the arc of crisis, stretching from Morocco to Myanmar, and including Central Asia. And if you put it all together and you mixed up all the crises that they were able in the last 8 years to produce in both regions, I think the situation is not very favorable for nobody, in particular for the former supervisor of the war, which is no longer there.
Okay.
Because it was not a question for Mariam, but I think
no. But
we discussed.
you...
Mariam and I discussed a lot about this stuff, so I think we are more or less on the same page. If you wanted to add something, Mariam, about that.
If I may, I have a question for Mariam, because I mean, Manlio, you gave us the US perspective, but Mariam, since we are based in Europe, all of us, we tend to watch from a European framework what's going on. And you just briefly mentioned that one of the contentious issues between India and US was that India has been buying Russian oil during the war after the Western sanctions against Russian oil. So how do you summarize the role of India in the Ukrainian conflict, and more in general, I mean, in its relationship with Russia? I mean, if I try to make the question more explicit, you said that India wants to be friends with everybody, but can European countries trust India, since India is a business partner of Russia in a moment when Russia is a strategic rival of Europe and a threat, a concrete threat to European integrity?
Yeah, so when the Ukraine war started, Modi was particularly very cautious not to condemn Russian actions. This was the time period when it exponentially increased the oil, the percentage of oil that it was buying from Russia. Obviously, I mean, even if it was diversifying in terms of defense and arm from Russia, Russia remained the top supplier. So France never surpassed Russia, basically, in supplying to India. And then, obviously, I mean, this is something that is a strategic concern when you pursue a multi-alignment strategy, when you try to be friends with everyone, that there is obviously this suspicion and you can't really, cement ties because of this. So, and I think that if you look closely at the EU-India trade deal, this is quite evident that although the deal was signed, if you look at the very particulars in different segments, these negotiations are still, to be held, to be discussed, and to be finalized. So I think that, the top priority was a signaling to the United States, but very deeply, obviously, there is going to be a lot of apprehension on both sides, and I don't think so that India will ever truly dissociate itself from Russia. Because although there was no defense or oil deal signed with Russia, but Putin was welcomed with all the pomp and show when he recently visited Modi in New Delhi, and they made sure that Putin realizes that Putin is still a very important player for India and its foreign policy. So, given that, obviously these worries are not going to go away anytime soon, but then that is what multi-alignment does. It increases instability, and it creates these alignments that are based on more short-term immediate needs rather than on long-term cemented alliances.
Maybe I take the opportunity to ask a super naive questions. I mean, India has always been proud of being the world's largest democracy. So how does it square with having this connection with Putin, since Putin is, I mean, the poster child of dictatorship, since he has been in power for more than 25 years with no real election and no real intention of respecting any form of democracy in Russia. I premise that it was a naive question, but I take the opportunity to ask it.
No, I think it's quite interesting because yes, I mean, given that it's the populist country, we tend to see that it's the largest democracy. But if you look closely within India and you look at the track records, it has everything but democracy, basically, or all the indicators. There are ethnic tensions, there is north and south divide, there is a rising nationalist Hindutva party that is actively discriminating against Muslims, and quite frankly, any other minority or religion, because they equate India with a land for Hindus, basically, where no one else is welcomed. Then you have a lot of ethnic tensions as well. Bengalis are quite persecuted, which is also one other bone of contention in Bangladesh-Indian ties. So there are all of these factors that go on within India as well, which kind of blinds the vision, you could say, of Indians who look at Russia. And secondly, it's all about strategy, and it's all about developing ties where interests lie. When India and Pakistan both were born out of the partition after the British left the subcontinent in 1947. And in the initial years, Pakistan was able to secure an alliance with the United States. And so it was quite natural for India to, pivot towards Russia at the time. And then eventually that was solidified, like I mentioned before, in the 1971 treaty. But generally, India has always pursued a very non-aligned or multi-alignment policy, where it does not want to be, termed as like a very, strict ally of one party. Essentially.
Okay,
So,
that was clear. Maybe, I mean, I know that it's late for you, but maybe since the conversation is super interesting, we can take a little bit more of your time, because I have a question for Manlio that can help us to enlarge the analysis. I noticed on Wikipedia, full disclosure, that Pakistan is a member of the Board of Peace created by Trump, while India is not. Since we are recording this conversation just a couple of days before the first meeting of this Board of Peace, and Italian government has announced that they will join as a observator, whatever it means. Manlio, how do you think that this Board of Peace can enter in this equation? Is this something meaningful? Is it something that can offer opportunity or / create additional tensions, or is something completely useless that is created just to flatter the ego of Donald Trump?
I would tend to answer to agree with your last explanation. No, I would say I am sure that it was something created to flatter himself, because he created for himself. And he said, I am the president for life, so don't bother me. The fact is, if we put it in the context of international relations, in particular in this moment of international relations, whenever you have a forum where you have different head of states and government who meet, something can come out from that. So I wouldn't say that it's totally useless, because they meet. Of course, they will be there essentially to praise Donald Trump and say how much is intelligent and whatever. and it was created for that essentially. And the fact that Pakistan is over there is not surprising, because even when they signed the very famous peace deal in Cairo, completely forgotten now, the Prime Minister of Pakistan was just behind Donald Trump, and smiling and showing that he agreed with everything. But of course, Pakistan is thinking essentially in regional terms. So in terms of what I can take from the United States and use against India, that's more or less, or even against Afghanistan, especially in this moment. Because if you remember, there was a moment when Donald Trump said that he wanted back at the base of Bagram in Kabul. And I don't think the Taliban are ready to open Bagram as again to the United States. But of course, that's something that now in the years of Pakistani is not very good news. Not very. So essentially,
why excuse me, can you explain better what does it mean a background base? What is strategic relevance in terms of regional equilibrium?
But it means that Bagram is a huge military base created by the Soviet Union when they occupied Afghanistan in 1979, in the 80s, and it was inherited by Americans and NATO during the presence after September 11 over there. And then, of course, when they left, the Taliban took the basis for them. To be back to the basis means to have a role, again, a regional role, a role in Afghanistan and a regional role. And since today Afghanistan is fighting, even if a lower intensity now, but still fighting against Pakistan, the fact that America shows interest in Afghanistan is not a good news in Islamabad, for sure. So that's one thing. But again, I think that we will see what happened in the meeting of the Board of Peace. But the best I can imagine is that is something like a sort of a Davos or a Munich conference in American source for the American interest, or for the Donald Trump's interest. But in any case, as we could see in Davos and in Munich, the fact that there was these leaders coming and explaining and everything, maybe we should say something about what happened in Munich.
Yeah.
But it was a way to see in which directions international relations could go, even though it's very strange that they needed to have these public scenes to explain their policies, because in the traditional way we learned when I was younger, because you're still young, the way to make policy was totally different, and the channels were different, because I cannot imagine Kissinger going there and explain publicly that he wanted to open the United States to China in 1971. We know that Kissinger went to China several times in secret. Nobody knew that. Certainly Nixon knew it, but very few people, even in the United States, even in the Nixon administration, didn't know that he was there. So it was completely another way of acting, and it was much more serious, because in politics, you have to do something in secrecy if you wanted to achieve something. If you just say, and by the way, if the United States send different people saying different things, it's even worse, because you don't understand anything.
Yeah, you mentioned the Monaco conference, security conference. Julia, I don't know if you want to introduce this topic. What's the feeling in Brussels? Are people relieved that Secretary of State Marco Rubio used completely different tones than J.D. Vance last year, or are people aware that he basically said the very same things with different words, which are that Europe is a problem for the US and they just want to support the kind of Europe they like?
And then he
Yeah.
went to see Orban, by the way.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. I think in the moment, obviously, it was a relief for all of the Europeans in the room. I mean, Marco Rubio got a standing ovation, which I don't know how justified that was, but it happened. I think it showed, the relief and the willingness of European leaders to try to reset and move away from the high point of tensions that you could see going on between the EU and the US just a few weeks ago. But I think as the dust settles, everyone, as far as I can tell, is agreed that, obviously the rhetoric is different, but the message is the same. If you really look into what Marco Rubio said, it was not different at all from what Vance said 1 year ago. And so I think it reiterates the point that Europe needs to start finding new alliances. They need to diversify their interests, and they need to continue on the path that they, decided to go on a few weeks ago after everything that happened with Greenland. I think there's a little bit of a relief, but also continued understanding that things are gonna change, and this doesn't. Marco Rubio's speech didn't really say anything new. Yeah.
I watched very few fragments of the streamed events, and the one that I bumped into was a panel discussion with Ambassador Mike Waltz. I think it's Mike, the first name. Yeah, Michael Waltz, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations and former U.S. national security strategy until he resigned because he shared the war plans with the journalist. But what do you think? This is a question for all of you, but maybe also for Mariam, because she has a different perspective. What do you think that there is behind this message that was summarized in this hat, "Make the UN Great Again"? A blue hat that Ambassador Waltz brought to Munich Security Conference. And basically his message was, we want to do with the UN what we have been doing with NATO, which is basically shaking the institution from the ground to make it stronger. Because this multilateral institution has basically relied too much on the US and they became ineffective. And we want to make the UN great again. What do you think? I mean, Mariam, do you have any opinion about the UN as it is now in terms of its relevance in regional equilibria? Can it become stronger because of Donald Trump, or is just craziness?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, the United Nations has been the legitimacy of the United Nations has often been challenged, and mostly by U.S. actions when it, has tried to bypass the Security Council to start wars, for example, and when the United Nations has failed to intervene in a satisfactory way to stop wars, for example. It has been often perceived as a tool for states to pursue their interests and to signal what they want. In the current scenario, we obviously, the way that Trump is behaving, the Trump administration is behaving, it is fundamentally putting a very big question mark on the international institutions, international law, norms that has been set. I mean, obviously, this is not to say that previously these norms and institutions were upheld for their normative considerations. Strategic interests always trumped, but at the very least, some lip service, some rhetoric was given to cushion these actions that were pursued for strategic interests. What has changed is that now Trump administration is very blatantly, without any rhetoric cushion, undermining these institutions, the norms, in the system. And secondly, that it's also not differentiating between its allies and adversaries. We talked about the Board of Peace just now, and that seems to be one of Trump's ways of undermining the legitimacy of the United Nations as well. So, it kind of makes sense for the European Union to try to, kind of push this rhetoric that they want to do this, they want to rebuild without the over-reliance on the United States. But I don't think so that's going to be as possible. It's mostly, it's quite over-ambitious. And secondly, that with decline such as this, one thing that you can do is that you can maybe slow down the rate of the decline, but to reverse it altogether is quite difficult.
I would add something quickly. I think it doesn't make any sense to me, this rhetoric that they would like to make the UN great again, especially considering that the US, for example, has completely slashed its funding to the UN. So how can you possibly rebuild something if you don't provide any sort of funding to it? I think it's a cover-up for what the US actually wants, which is just to retreat and not to have anything to do with the UN anymore, not to have to feel, I guess, trapped by international norms and have to provide funding for something that Trump sees as not valuable. And so, if the UN fails, then they don't have to be a part of it anymore, and it's all the better for them. I don't think that the US is trying to make the UN great again. I don't see any evidence of that.
Walt's argument was that slashing the fund was a way to force the UN to become more efficient and more effective. But we all know that huge bureaucracy do not work like this. That if you reduce the funding, they just not become better by magic. But Manlio, I want to ask you something, because we are going to the end of our conversation, to connect with something that Mariam was saying that also resonates with the famous speech by Mark Carney in Davos, that we all know that the old world order was rooted in some level of hypocrisy, because the rules were not the same for everybody. But that hypocrisy was kind of useful, because even the US had to ask a resolution to the UN Security Council before going to war in Iraq. They thought that it was useful for them to have a UN coverage. So now we are going in a situation where, things are the same, but they are just more explicit. And someone in Italy says that it's better, because now we see things as they are. So we are not pretending that they are different, or we are losing something with less hypocrisy or less diplomacy, if you want to say in a different way.
Usually we forgot the fact that the United Nations was founded by the United States, and the Charter of the United Nations was written in 1941. And even Kissinger says that this charter was drawing a new map of the world, following the desire of the United States. So multilateralism is something that is very useful for the dominant power, because it's a way to show that they are open. But of course, the rules of multilateralism, be it the United Nations or the Monetary Fund or the World Bank or the GATT, the World Trade Organization, these rules were written by the United States in the interest of the United States, with the purpose of prolong the superiority of the United States. So the very fact that there were many countries, 122, 23, depends, that participated in this huge assembly was the proof that they were ready to adhere to the rules written by the United States, which was very good for the United States.
Yeah.
Then you said, okay, the United States in 2003 went in front of the Security Council and said, oh, we wanted to attack Iraq. Are we allowed to do it? And the Security Council said no, and the United States said, okay, and we attacked Iraq in any case. So, and it was the same thing for the war in Kosovo in 1999. So it means that the rules were binding for everybody, but not for the United States. Kissinger, in his book, writes that in history there is no record of an organism of collective security like the United Nations ever stopped a great power when the great power wanted to do whatever they wanted. And this is more or less the principle. So the difference between before and now is not just the hypocrisy, which is true, by the way, in the sense that people who wanted to believe that the United Nations was something they could use against the superpower of the United States. They were just the believers. So, but it didn't work this way. The difference is the fact that until the let's say Obama administration and probably also Biden administration, they in the United States, the administration thought, and all the administration, previous administration, both Republican and Democratic, thought that this multilateralism was working for them. So they were happy to maintain this fiction of multilateralism. Today is clear that this is the conclusion, and I would say this is also the reason why we have these ideas, again, bipartisan in the United States, that whatever the Americans did in the world in the last 80 years was a waste, essentially. We gave them money. All the people took advantage of our generosity, and now they have to pay back. And this is an idea very much shared among the Americans. So they say, okay, now we see that these multilateral institutions are no longer useful for us. So we don't abandon them, not yet at least, because we keep a little bit of this fiction. We say with the ambassador to the United Nations that we wanted to rejuvenate, but at the same time they are emptying it from the inside.
Yeah, so basically when they say we want to make the UN great again, it's not the real message. It's not what they mean.
It's in line. It is in line with the idea that Marco Rubio went there to mend the relationship between the United States and people who want to believe in that, they will find something to believe in.
Yeah.
So
it's a matter of faith. So thank you so much, Manlio Graziano. Thank you so much, Giulia Shaughnessy, as always, and especially thank you so much, Mariam, for being with us, Mariam Qureshi. I remember you all that she's an analyst for the Speakman Center, and she's a scholar in international relations, and we are lucky to have her as a contributor to Appunti with her essays. So thank you so much for this special episode in English. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I think that we truly add something to our comprehension of this chaotic world. We tend to be too much Western-centric, Italy-centric, or European-centric, Eurocentric. So thank to Mariam, we expanded our perspective. Thank you so much again, and hopefully we will be here next week.
Thank you so much for having me.
Bye-bye.
Bye.